We'll be arriving at the Academy in just a few minutes.
That would be so great! Aren't you excited? We're going to be Jedi! Learning the ways of the Force, building a lightsaber. Ah, of course, you already have one. I'm gonna get one of those stupid training sabers and
I wouldn't worry about that.
Sometimes a long-running series becomes stale. All the ideas the devs are willing to explore get explored, and every entry becomes the last game but with a slightly new story. But then sometimes a long-running series, especially when developed over a period of snowballing technology, has so much room to grow that by the last entry, every gameplay aspect has been built upon with layers and layers of complexity. Now, by that description, clearly that's not always a good thing. Overcomplicated mechanics and design can become an obstacle more than anything else, especially in less strategy-focused games. But when paired with the right control scheme, you get a magically intuitive experience. Meet Jedi Academy, the last entry in the long-running Star Wars Jedi Knight series. A quintrilogy, quintuplet, a series, a saga of Star Wars games from back in the old pre-Disney Star Wars era, which I guess is like an alternate timeline now or something. Either way, I could go on and on about every entry in this series, and they're all good for different reasons. Like, for example, the original few are basically classic Doom / Wolfenstein 3D reskinned, but unlike a lot of clones described that way, Dark Forces 1 and 2 are great. Maybe even better in some ways since they had access to improved tech, but I am not talking about those right now. The style I want to dig into comes from the last two, Jedi Knight Outcast and the subject of this vid, Jedi Academy. By this entry, the series had morphed into some kind of three-way hybrid like one of those triangle graphs. On one point, you've got the preserved skeleton of classic boomer shooters, but pretty much only the good ideas. Everything that was too old about them is gone by this time. On another point, you've got adventure game-esque platforming and parkouring. There's in fact so many movement options that I will fully admit, I completely forgot about a lot of them until near the end of replaying this game. And honestly, that's kind of awesome. You so rarely get a game nowadays that feels like it's got a ton of mechanics until your buddy or some internet guy tells you, actually, there's a whole other half of the game you didn't even realize was there. Like, you can go through Jedi Academy and Outcast without ever using these, and it's still great. But the flips and wall runs just add that perfect cherry on top that make you feel like you're way more skilled at the game than you actually are. The third point, and what I think keeps people playing the multiplayer to this day, is the unparalleled lightsaber combat. And I mean unparalleled. I've never had a human being tell me that they've disliked the swordplay. And in fact, most of what I've heard is people saying that it's the best there's ever been. And boy, do I have to agree with them. I mean, it's just so satisfying. You find yourself reloading fights just to try to get them to look cooler. And I mentioned the multiplayer still being active, and it really is. Go look up Jedi Academy Movie Battles 2 on YouTube, and you will find videos on experts moving like straight up movie scenes. Movie Battles 2 is a multiplayer mod for Jedi Academy that adds in a ton of stuff, but I'm also not talking about that here. Mainly because I'm nowhere near good enough to do it justice. But don't let that make you think you can't get into the game easily. I've heard pretty good things about the community, and the controls are not hard to learn if you really give it a shot. And that is because of the genius of the lightsaber combat. It's not a bunch of buttons you need to learn to have combos come out like a lot of other action games with deep movesets. It is all movement based. You move left while swinging, you'll do one move. You move right, you'll swing the other way. Standing still, moving forward, backwards, rolling, spinning in a circle, jumping. All these directions and actions modify the way your character attacks. To the point where, even if you just start mashing and spamming, it'll still look fantastic. No matter how trash you are, you will still look like some action hero playing this game, because even by accident, you'll end up doing cool stuff. And a lot of why that works is not just the intuitive controls, although I cannot express enough how good and easy they are. But also, Jedi Knight Outcast, and especially Jedi Academy, really double down on the sandbox gameplay. It is not open world, which is probably what most people are used to nowadays when they think of sandbox. Instead, it's more about ignoring balance in favor of giving the player 115 million abilities, gadgets, weapons, etc. to tackle any situation the way they want to. Depending on how you want to handle an area, you can make a level or even just individual fights play out in completely different ways. Yeah, sure, some of the force powers or blasters might suck, but they don't suck enough not to be viable. And while bits of the game can be tricky, especially on high difficulty, and especially when you turn on dismemberment, which, if you want to know how, I linked an easy guide in the description for getting everything out of the PC version. But like I was saying, the game is designed overall for combat to be forgiving enough that you really can experiment and have fun with everything on offer without feeling like you're really handicapping yourself. It's fluid, I think, is what I'm trying to say. Every mechanic overlaps just enough that you can mix and match or double down on one direction, and the game combat will just flow with you in a way that honestly feels kind of encouraging. Like playing a pen and paper RPG with a fantastic DM. Speaking of sandboxing, let's get into the actual campaign of Jedi Academy, because one of the first things you'll notice if you played earlier entries but not this one is there's a character creator, instead of just playing as Kyle Katarn. Now, it is not great, but for 2003 this was such a treat, and really readies you for the main focus of this particular entry in the series, which is trying to make you feel like you're going through the training and adventures of a Jedi from Padawan to Knight, which is something other Star Wars media has really struggled to capture. For those who have played the earlier games and are mad you're not playing as Kyle Katarn anymore, do not worry, he gets a ton of screen time in this one as your teacher. Oh, and I just realized I probably need to actually explain who Kyle Katarn is for younger people, because who knows if he's even canon anymore. The best way I can put it is he's sort of opposite Kylo Ren, but with a similar level of intense fan popularity. He's just this really chill, snarky dude, like the scoundrel with a heart of gold, but humble instead of an asshole. And in Jedi Academy especially, he gives off these great dad vibes.
So, did I win?
It wasn't a competition.
I'm sorry,
I'm not the one you should be apologizing to.
It's no big deal. You said yourself this wasn't a competition.
Hey, it was just a joke. I didn't think it would...
If that droid was set to Luke's training regimen, it would have killed Jaden. What were you thinking?
Jaden, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I mean, I wasn't trying to...
Save it, Rosh.
Jaden, you have a right to be angry. But believe me when I say you don't want to feed that emotion.
I understand, Master Katarn. Apology accepted, Rosh.
Good, that's settled. And remember, it's Kyle?
Yes, Kyle.
Sure thing, Kyle.
Okay. You're both ready to start putting what you've learned to use. Let's see how you do in the real world.
I don't know if Zoomers would think he's cool anymore like people used to, and honestly, his character still works pretty well, even if you don't, cause his laid-back energy is just endearing either way. Back on topic, the structure of the story is also different and new for this particular entry. Instead of a normal, just linear story, the game is broken up into multiple chapters, each with a set of missions you can complete in any order. And normally, I am not a fan of this kind of thing. It can get messy and unfocused, plus you're always going to get some missions that are just worse than the others because they didn't spend as much time on them, or they just had to come up with so many varied level ideas that a few are just not going to play well. And while all of that is to some extent true here, Jedi Academy still manages to be one of the few games with this kind of structure that I love, and in my opinion, is better off because of it. This is for a couple of big reasons. One, it just fits in really well with the theme of training to be a Jedi. Because in the movies, this is always what we hear about, but never actually see them doing. Going on random missions on random planets, trying to solve people's problems. And the variety really makes it make more sense that these Jedi in the movies have this tool belt of skills, because the missions end up mostly being pretty different from each other. From investigating cults, to racing around on speeders, to running away from rancors, to reenacting the movie Tremors. And on top of that, not all are different. You get some spiritual sequel missions. For example, after that Rancor mission I mentioned, there's another Rancor mission later on where they turn everything up to a 10, knowing you've already got the experience to tackle a bigger version. And honestly, it's great. Almost like a payoff. Another big reason you get excited to hit up the next mission is you get your abilities by doing them. And that already is giving the wrong impression, because I don't mean that you do a mission and then get a Force ability. What I mean is, before every mission, you get to choose from a selection of powers, either a new one or upgrading old ones, and then in that very same mission, you get to actually use it. That means that every level has a new toy to play around with. A new toy you specifically get to pick yourself. So yes, you do get the option to skip a level every chapter if there's one you just don't like. But you never want to, because you know you're going to get something fun out of it, and you'll have that for the rest of the game. But the last and best reason this adventure structure works is the devs had the foresight to sandwich a story mission between every chapter that are usually 2 to 3 times the length of a normal level. These further the overarching plot and are usually good tests of the mechanics you just practiced. Plus, while you don't get to pick a new power for these, you do get excellent upgrades to your core Force powers. We're talking better Force jump for new acrobatics, Force pushes and pulls that just sweep through rooms, and if you want to turn every difficulty into easy difficulty, Force speed just becomes more and more a straight-up cheat code the higher it gets upgraded. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a Star Wars game, and with the exception of Knights Old Republic 2, Star Wars writing is never going to get super deep, and the dialogue is always going to be cheesy. But that seems to be a part of what people like about the franchise anyway. Plus, because of the way they get you invested in your character, and unlike a lot of games, Jedi Academy gives him or her some actual personality, you actually are interested just enough to want to know what you're going to end up doing next. And this is so especially true because of the outstanding atmosphere Jedi Academy, and really the whole series, creates. I can see the locale diversity being slightly better, but not by much, and really only because there are a few too many with sand. But beyond that, you really get your money's worth in terms of sci-fi planets, including a bunch that everyone knows, like Hoth or Tatooine, to somewhat known ones like Biss and Korriban, to completely new ones like Vajun. The sound design has always been great in the series, but there's something particular about Jedi Academy that takes it to a whole new level, that even Jedi Outcast didn't quite reach, even though those are very similar looking games. The object clutter is at a perfect level. There's a great balance between outdoor and indoor locations, and while the levels are mostly linear, every room, cavern, or base is bigger than they needed to be, and it adds this immensity and scope. Unlike a lot of games, especially older ones, every place you visit actually feels livable and alive. It feels like the devs actually considered why a lot of rooms exist. They're not just purposeless fight arenas. Yeah, some of it is that weird early 3D game, what is this supposed to be for? But it's the exact same ratio of that Star Wars movies tend to have. Even beyond that, if you cut out everything explicitly Star Wars, Jedi Academy would still have a great sci-fi setting, with every single bit having fantastic vistas to look at or interesting buildings to explore. I really just miss this specific style of aesthetics in Star Wars. Disney went with a different, more clean, cartoony, shiny look, but it's just nice getting back to the more geometric industrial style from the 70s, 80s era of the franchise, where everything looked functional and jury-rigged. Everything was dirty and gritty instead of clean, and the natural elements of the planet were more integrated with the artificially created structures dotting the landscape. I'm sure this bit is much more of a personal preference thing, but you gotta admit, it adds a sense of utility to the tech and mystery to the environment. I know I'm always wondering what all this stuff is for whenever I'm just wandering around the game. And I think nothing helps an adventure game really feel like an adventure more than having an environment you really just want to delve deeper into than the mechanics allow. It's kind of like the equivalent of a story, leaving you wanting more and to know what happens next. Here I just want to explore deeper and deeper into these planets because what's there is just enough to keep my attention locked in without being overwhelmed. And yeah, some of the areas are kind of same looking, but the devs were smart enough to specifically fill these rooms with engaging combat encounters, so even if you enter a boring space, you know it's going to make up for it with a good fight puzzle. This is how they make even the few instances of backtracking not boring. You know that if you ever have to leave the way you came in, that the area is going to get repopulated with enemies in such a way that you'll have to tackle the environment in a completely different manner. In fact, sometimes the encounters are better backwards than forwards, with rooms designed specifically knowing that you might head back in that exact direction. But even then, this doesn't happen as much, and mostly in missions where it makes sense. I only remember maybe 3 levels where you have to walk back out. Overall, there's always this sense of forward motion. No real mazes, no large branching routes. Yeah, it makes it more linear, but at the same time, it means more content on your main path. Look, I'm not trying to say anything about this game is particularly groundbreaking. Even the lightsaber combat technically came about first in Jedi Outcast. And even that was built on the bones of Dark Forces 2's decent melee combat. What I'm saying is Jedi Academy is the culmination of years of ideas and mechanics all pushed to their very limit. Dark Forces 2 didn't have saber styles where you can switch up your moveset and the way you swing, and Outcast didn't have dual or double-bladed sabers. What Jedi Academy lacks in originality, it makes up for by having the best version of every mechanic and idea throughout the series. It's a remix that becomes unique because no one has ever done anything quite like it again. Don't get me wrong, there have been great sci-fi and even specifically Star Wars games in a similar vein since. Jedi Fallen Order is legitimately really good, and similar in that it's an adventure game, but its focus is different, and its combat is intentionally not as fluid in order to feel, for lack of a better word, tighter. I'd argue, given modern graphics and release today, no one would have any idea that Jedi Academy was from 2003. In fact, I bet you it'd be considered groundbreaking and innovative. And before anyone says, yeah, well, if that were true, then they would have made a sequel. That's not what happened. Star Wars media went through a really shaky period in the late 2000s and early 2010s, as George Lucas was trying to sell the series. A ton of well-selling game series started getting canceled. We're talking Knights of the Republic 3, we're talking Battlefront 3, we're talking 1313, we're talking Star Wars Republic Commando 2, or I think it was going to be called Imperial Commandos or something. And just like Republic Commando, they were so aware that people actually liked these games and wanted more that they re-released Jedi Academy on PS4 and the Switch. All these entries that maybe you grew up with or have just heard about or are only hearing about now have no modern incarnation because of corporate logistics. And it worries me so much that so many styles of games are disregarded as potential successes because they stopped coming out, as if they didn't sell well enough. And I'm not necessarily talking about specifically another Star Wars game like this, though I am certainly up for that. But I'm saying, just take these mechanics and run with them like Jedi Academy did. Because I have zero confidence that Disney has any idea what it's doing with its Star Wars video game spin-offs. They seem to have just dropped the license in EA's lap and then only remember it's a thing when they get checks in the mail. I mean, the only time I can think of that Disney actually acknowledged Star Wars games was that big Battlefront 2 mess, and even then it was pretty clear that they just wanted to do the bare minimum and bounce. It'd be just such a waste if we let game ideas like this die, like what happened to RTSs, for example. I just hope that people either who grew up with these games or who were born later and went back to check out these can eventually make it into the industry and go, yeah, hey, maybe these gameplay concepts are actually pretty good. Why don't we have a modern title like this? Because you don't have to be completely original to be unique. You just have to put something out that no one else currently is. There's hope here too, because I think as a lot of people have started noticing, there's been a flood of 90s style throwback games lately, especially in the indie scene or with smaller devs. And if that's happening, maybe in a decade we'll start seeing the same for games from the 2000s. But here's the thing, as much as I would love throwbacks, that's really not what I'm talking about. Legitimately, there's the basis for a great modern-feeling game here. Because, if anything, I'll double down and say Jedi Academy may have been too ahead of its time for what the tech was capable of. But hey, until then, you can still go back and play Jedi Academy and still enjoy the adventure like it's 2003 again. And if the graphics bug you that much, just slap a texture mod on it or something. I mean, isn't that what you guys have been doing with Skyrim for 10 years? I mean, can you do this in Skyrim? Oh. I guess never mind then.